go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing?
Good.
I'm Trip Jennings, the executive director of New Mexico In Depth. We're a nonprofit media outlet that's been around 10 years. And we're basically having a Facebook Live on the subject of the importance of journalism and democracy. It's just a really hot topic these days. And I'm joined by Marjorie Childress, our managing editor. Say hi, Marjorie.
Hi, everyone.
I'm joined by Gwyneth Doland, who is our guest today, who is at the University of New Mexico. She teaches journalism. She's also a working journalist who's about to get her master's degree from the hallowed institution over there in the other coast, one of the coasts. And we're joined by Joanna Perez, who is also helping us administer the Facebook Live. So welcome everyone to our Facebook Live. And we just thought it was really important to have this discussion, this conversation. It's part of something that we've been thinking about at New Mexico In Depth a lot, and I know Gwyneth has too, and a lot of other folks have too, is basically in this age where there is so much information. It's coming at us all the time. Social media, the internet, in addition to the traditional ways, television, newspapers, also just gossip in our neighborhood. There's so much information that we're having to take in. It seems to us that journalism is just that much more important these days because we have to sift through all the information if we want to be, kind of active citizens, people who make decisions in a democracy. We have to have good information. And it's just extraordinary right now as we are thinking about the information flow, in our nation and globally. And just trying to piece together why it's important that journalists are doing the work they do, and why it's important that there is vetted information coming at people, and there's also a space where people can debate. And I think Marjorie, has a pretty good example, of what's happening globally, internationally. It's just one among many, but it's on our minds a lot. Marjorie, would you like to take over and just kind of talk to the folks who are listening about?
Sure. Well, I really just want to kick it to Gwyneth, but I just want to ask her what her thoughts are about. I think we've had a really dramatic example of what can happen. We had an authoritarian person, launch a war Putin, Russia's Putin on Ukraine. And one of the first things he did was basically shut down the free press in Russia. He passed some kind of draconian law that caused Western institutions to to shut down their offices in Russia, as well as some of the last remaining independent press outlets in Russia to shut down. And this all happened right as he was launching his war in Ukraine, as a way to, I think, effectively silence independent voices inside his own country. How does that fit into this discussion? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that points precisely to the role of journalism in a democracy. It's meant to empower the people, right? And that is why the founders created such a strong role for the press and strong constitutional protections for the press, because they had experienced extreme censorship and they knew how it limited their ability to control their own lives, right? And so they created this different system of government, which dispersed power between three branches and then gave a special role to the press to act as a watchdog for all three. And even though, honestly, media at the time in the 18th century in this country was trash. It was a lot of tabloid trash, but some good information did get out there, right? And people had the ability to get some information out there, people with access. So this is a very fundamental relationship between those in power and the people in general, right? And so our job in journalism is to empower regular people with the information they need to participate in a democracy, with the information they need to figure out which of these school board candidates believes the way I do about censorship, which of these city council candidates believes in urban planning the way I do, which of these propositions of how to spend our tax bond money, do I want to support? And if we aren't here to provide verified, vetted information with context, then people don't have the information they need, not only just to vote, but to participate in other ways. They don't know where to donate money, which causes or groups or organizations or candidates are worth their volunteer time or their money or their support in other ways. And when it comes to, bigger societal issues, it takes a lot of time for people to figure out where they sit and what the nuances of their opinions are on things like abortion and gun control. And foreign policy, our role in NATO. How important do we think that is? That's all of a sudden really important for us to figure out how we feel about, right? So I feel it's not surprising to me at all that Putin has done that. I mean, he's used laws, he's used straight up assassination, right?
Mhm.
To eliminate people who threaten his power. We've seen this happen in North Korea, in Turkey, right? Where Erdogan has been imprisoning journalists on trumped up charges and limiting the ability of the media to cover him, right? This is also the exact same pattern we see in every high school whose student paper has done an uncomfortable story about teen pregnancy or drugs, right? Poof, all of a sudden there's no paper anymore, right? Because the parents don't like it. Yeah.
Can you say something about, the importance of, this is something that we have talked about over the years. We've all known each other for a long time. We've thought about these things, but there is this concept of the public commons where people can go and they have a shared set of facts, or at least there's information they can sift through and debate. This is very important to me because I love to debate stuff. Journalism is really important to that in a democracy.
It is. And the danger is that people tune out. I just had my hair cut and my stylist said to me, I don't even want to hear about any of these mass shootings. There's nothing we can do. And I don't normally engage, in political conversations, but I said to her, hey, wait, hold on.
Journalism is really important to that in a democracy.
It is. People to mass shootings, there's nothing we can do. And I don't normally engage, in political conversations, but I said to her, hey, wait, hold on.
Journalism is really important to that.
Close your Facebook. People to mass shootings, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, somebody's Facebook is open.
Normally engage. Is it me? I'm not even watching the thing. Okay, well, let's give it a shot here. I was saying, she said, I can't even pay attention to this. There's nothing we can do. And I said, well, I mean, just for conversation's sake, there's a lot you can do. There are solutions to these problems. There's a lot of things you can do. And there is hope. You have to figure out what it is you want to change and elect those people, right? And she's like, oh, but it'll never change. I said, it's as simple as one election and a lot of things can change, So without paying attention, without knowing what are in this case, this is the topic of conversation everywhere. How do we keep extremists from committing mass murder? It's obviously there's a huge gun control debate to be had here. What kinds of guns should we allow or not allow? What kinds of ammunition or magazines or stuff like that? What sorts of checks should be done? New York State had a red flag law. We just passed a red flag law that allows authorities to take guns away from people who are in danger of hurting themselves or others. And there's a story in the New York Times, I think today, about how New York's red flag law didn't work in this case and why. And it's important for us to look at that and reevaluate the law that we passed here. Oh, crikey, is there something wrong? Is there a loophole in the law that would have not prevented this? Do we need to go back and adjust that? If you're not paying attention, you're not a part of the solution. You're actively a part of the problem. Not my stylist in particular.
No, right. Okay. You know what, the thing is we're talking about the just proliferation of sites that are just pumping out information. You know, at the same time, you know, just making it incredibly difficult for folks to actually, you know, sort or sift through all this information. You know, at the same time this is happening, you know, regional and local newspapers and other outlets are not able to compete. We've just lost so many over the last decade and a half,
Yeah.
which makes them much more important. I mean, how about that? I mean, you know, why is local news so important?
Well, we have seen this pattern of media consolidation over the past few decades, right? Bigger corporations swallowing up smaller papers, getting eaten up by hedge funds who squeeze every dollar out and then just, you know, essentially throw them away. And the problem is that we have a bunch of really great national news organizations, right? They do such a good job. I read them every day. We all do. But that leaves us in the lurch if no one's writing about, for example, our red flag laws, our gun laws, our mental health treatment, what we're doing to figure out who are the teenagers in terrible trouble who need help, who need intervention before they go and do something like this. If we're not looking at what's happening here in New Mexico, it doesn't, I mean, nothing matters, right? What's happening in New York can't necessarily solve our problems here, right?
Well, yes, like
that local journalism does is it takes these national and international topics and we add the vital context of how this plays out in New Mexico. So if the Supreme Court does in fact decide a case along the lines of the decision that's been leaked, what is the impact in New Mexico? Obviously, it's hugely different from the impact in New York or LA or Washington, D.C., right? People here need to know, how is my life going to change in Albuquerque, in Santa Fe, in Raton, in Silver City if this law changes? What's going to be different for me? And we have to be here to do that.
I would, you know, a prime example of local news is the Taos News right now.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
and the wildfires up in northern New Mexico that you will see stories in the New York Times, thanks to our, you know, the New York Times reporter who's based here in New Mexico. But you know, the Taos News is just all over it. It's their story.
I mean, the local outlets give you this kind of granular, ongoing reporting that you're never going to get from national outlets who do kind of the big picture stuff. They might kind of come in and do something real deep investigative piece, or they might do, you know, some kind of nice feature, but it's really at the local news level that you're going to see this sustained coverage over time.
Yeah, and these outlets like the Taos News do essential everyday reporting. What's happening at the city council? What's happening at your school board? Where are these fires? Which communities are ready? Which are set and which are go? That is so essential, that everyday reporting. And it is a real bummer that we've lost so many outlets in northern New Mexico, that there used to be other papers, other news outlets up there. And now it's really down to the Taos News. But there are things that even the Taos News has a pretty small staff. There are things that they can't, they just can't prioritize the way they used to. And that's where New Mexico in Depth comes in.
Well,
adding context.
I just want to say real quick, I want to add props to the Carlsbad paper, because they were doing this in April when they had a huge fire in Ruidoso. So it is Taos News, it's Carlsbad, Current Argus. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's just so important.
I mean, there's an element here, though. I mean, where we have to be, you know, also just really think critically about, well, how does social media, how does the ability of a lot of these kind of public institutions to just generate news themselves? When we saw it all through the pandemic with Lujan Grisham running her own press conferences on Facebook, and so it's almost like bypassing the media and going direct to the consumer. So there is a really kind of new paradigm that has emerged, and sometimes, you know, I really like to grapple with, okay, well, what is the actual essential role that actual, you know, trained and organized press outlets provide the community?
So I love, you know, I drove from Denver to Albuquerque on Sunday past all of the fires, and got a little OCD. It's a long drive, okay, but I got a little OCD looking at the news on my phone. And I love it that the State Fire Coordination Organization puts out these maps and puts all this information out there on Twitter, and then they link to this website where they've got all this information. I love having access to that raw information, but it isn't until you go to the Taos News that you see, you know, these people, they've left their animals and they're staying in these shelters and they're not sure how many beds are here and how many beds are there and what resources are available in Taos or in Espanola and what's in Albuquerque. You get so much more information than just here's a map showing you how the fire is different today. And even it's hard for me to see those maps. I will say, I read a story in the Taos News yesterday that was like, you know, covering a lot of this stuff. And they talked to some people who were in shelters and they said, you know, what do you need most? And they're like, can you bring us some copies of the paper? We really need reading material. And I was like, yay.
Yes.
That's
so,
awesome.
So Gwyneth, so let's say you're kind of out there and you're saying, okay, well, how do people find the news, the local news that they need?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem we're having now is that the landscape has changed so much from one generation to the next that, you know, I grew up and the Washington Post was outside the back door every single morning. Great. And every night, you know, there were 3 channels to choose from that had all of the news that you would need. And so we did that, right? And now you look at your phone and you're like, well, who's this? And what's happening here? And so I talk to young people about who's writing this. Google this person. Who is the author of this? Google this organization. Click about me. Who are these people? Where do they get their money? Where did they come from? You know, where are they on Twitter? What does their LinkedIn say? You know, what's their presence on Facebook? Scope these people out. And then when you're looking at information, you have the immediate question is this opinion or is this news, right? If there's a whole lot of me and I and we and terrible and heinous and all sorts of opinion in it, you're like, okay, I understand what this is. And maybe this is an opinion piece from, you know, maybe this is an opinion piece from someone who survived a previous mass shooting. And you're like, okay, I want to hear what this person has to say, because that's going to help me kind of figure out how I feel about this. But that's over here. That's opinion over here. You want to know what's happening in Buffalo, you go to Buffalo news organizations because they have their feet on the ground there. And you want to see, are they quoting people, right? Are they using direct quotes from authorities, people in office, you know, people in community organizations, and regular people? In a news story, you expect to see several people quoted, and you expect a diversity of perspective from those quotes, right? And you expect verified facts. One of the first things I look for is a dateline, right? That first little piece of information on the first line of a news story. Does it say Albuquerque? Does it say Buffalo? That means that reporter is there, right? That means a lot to me. And when you hear stories on NPR, they tell you, you know, from Istanbul, I'm Peter Kenyon, right? And you're like, okay, he's reporting on Syria, but he's not in Syria, but he's as close as he can be, right?
So there's, attribution. I mean, if there's going to be some big picture look, it's usually attributed to a report that someone said. And honestly, the news outlets will link to that report. So the person who's reading it or listening can actually, look at the report and basically say, I'm not sure I agree with the methodology, or I do, or it is transparent in some ways, I think.
I like it that you use the word methodology, because we talk about journalism as a scientific method, right? So here's the topic that we want to write about. And say today, I'm sorry, I keep talking about Buffalo, but I'm upset. But, here we want to talk about, good gravy, where do these people come from and how can we stop this, right? And so you say, well, let's look at gun control again for the 30th time. Which of these things are realistically possible? Which of these things could there be some compromise on? And you work up a hypothesis. Maybe there could be some changes to the red flag law. So you think, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Could there be some changes to the red flag law here? Okay, do we need them? Would they help? What do people think? You start calling people. Who sponsored the bill? Call that person, right? Who opposed the bill? Call that person. Who are the community organizations who are involved in this? Domestic violence organizations, gun control organizations, gun rights organizations, right? And you test your hypothesis. You ask them, do we need a change to the red flag law? What do you think? How would it help? Oh, but what about this? You know, the people who don't like that say this is the problem. And you work through it, right? They give you some facts. You say, where did you get that information, right? And then you go check it and you look up the report that you just mentioned, right? So you want to see, when you're looking at information out there and trying to discern what is high quality information, you're seeing the evidence. So you see a quote from so-and-so state legislator who says, we absolutely need to overhaul this red flag law or people will die. And then you get some information and you get another quote from somebody saying, you know what? I think our law is really strong. And we're going to talk next session about this one very specific tweak that cops and domestic violence advocates and mental health advocates and all these other people say might make a difference, right? And you're like, oh, this is really interesting, right? Now you know where to go. So, you know, you're looking for not just people yelling on TV, right?
It's interesting to hear you describe that process, Gwyneth, because I mean, what comes to mind for me is, I mean, you're describing the process of how reported stories and really a multiplicity of them, right? How they kind of move along a public conversation on the topic over time. Because it's not just one story that does that. It's a lot of different reported stories over time where you have people putting out their, you know, their perspectives on these issues, their solutions, and you have other people who come in and respond to that. And it's just in some ways, it's a very it's like a craft, you know? And so as a consumer, it's like really thinking about a consumer of news. What I think about is, okay, where am I going to find the journalist, really? We're talking about journalists who can really effectively kind of, you know, help me understand where the conversation is, what the conversation is, and how to move it along. Where you're not always just right here, you know?
Yeah, I mean, people think, oh, it's just the truth. It's just facts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, no, it's not at all. You can't just stop with the facts. I think of this every time I see the new jobs numbers. The economy added 200,000 jobs last month. And I'm like, you might have said 6 million or 14. and I have no idea what you're talking about unless you say to me, that's 20,000 less than economists had expected. It's 20,000 less than we gained last month, and we're down 40% from last year or whatever. And you ask people, why is this happening? And it's like, oh, well, all the meat processing plants have been closed because of COVID. So those are workers who are probably going to come back, blah, blah, blah. I mean, none of this information means anything. You know, we talk about, I remember learning in 4th grade, who, what, when, where, you know? We had a journalist from the Washington Post come in and teach us how to write a little news story. I'm sure they were terrible, but we learned who, what, when, where, right? But we talk about who, what, when, where, why, how, and so what. And that's what New Mexico in Depth does. That's what I love about NMID. Why, how, and so what? What do these numbers mean? What does this change mean? You know, today we're talking about fire in northern New Mexico, and there's debate happening about fireworks again. Should we ban fireworks at the state level? And on the one hand, I'm like, yes, do it right now. And on the other hand, I'm like, oh, my kid loves fireworks on the 4th of July, right? So where is the place where we try to prevent the state from burning down, but kids still get sparklers and snakes? Like, what's the line? Where is the part where we can sort of come together on an agreement, on a limit that is helpful in preventing fires, but doesn't ruin the 4th of July for kids, right?
You know, yeah, you're talking about that space, you know, a story, or that space where people can listen to various people who might disagree, and maybe there's a rationale for the person who's disagreeing, it may give you pause because you have to think about the rationale. Maybe a really good rationale, frankly. It may change your mind, it may not, but at least you understand where someone's coming from, which is what I think journalism helps.
Yes, yes. This is a quality of high quality news organizations, is that they help you move toward that place where you're coming up with solutions that are actually workable right now, right? So it's not like fireworks are awesome and this is about freedom and we need to be able to do whatever we want, or fireworks are the devil and we should never have any of them. That kind of yelling from opposite sides of the room doesn't help anyone do anything. Nothing happens. No solutions happen. No one moves forward in any direction from there.
And we see that play out. We see it play out in the State House all the time.
Right.
Just this entrenched kind of this side, that side, neutral ground.
And a lot of it is that we're so soaked in just pure opinion right now. And that's what you get when you go on Twitter and you put hashtag NMLedge. And what you get is lawmakers out there saying, I feel so strongly about this in one way. And you get a lobbyist yelling in the other direction. And what journalism does is help you figure out what that yelling mess actually means.
I'll say this too. I mean, like Marjorie's right. On the floor debates in the House or the Senate, you often find this what she's talking about. But of course, in the back rooms or in the committee rooms, you'll have thoughtful debate sometimes, and that's where the real work does for lawmakers. And there is this kind of fire that comes with the really hot debates where people get heated and stuff. And it's important. It's really important. But realizing that there's folks up there, policymakers, lawmakers, advocates, lobbyists who are really often wrestling with the complexities of an issue because there are so many different people involved. In creating a law, and they have different interests. So. That's just it's kind of interesting. It's fascinating to be a part of that process.
I'm not saying there's that being pissed off about something is wrong. It's not.
No, right.
No. Somebody told me when I was a kid, if you're not pissed off about something, you're not doing it right. So I think it is important that you are aware enough of things that are wrong in society, whether it's missing and murdered Indigenous women or tax policy, right? You better be pissed off about something that's motivating you to be a part of the force of change, right? And journalism empowers you to do that. High quality journalism empowers you to do that. So it's not just, oh, here are the poll numbers. Someone's winning, someone's losing. This is going to be really painful. But like, seriously, what do these people think about abortion and fireworks and gun control and mental health and tax policy? And let's help you understand which of these candidates speaks to you. Which of these candidates seems like they're going to do what you want them to do, that they share your values, that they share your plans, that they share your fire, right? And if we're only telling you who's up and who's down, that doesn't help you vote at all. That doesn't help you solve any problems. It means sometimes this person has better hair.
Going into an election year, maybe we should talk a little bit about the role of journalism a little bit more going into the midterms. I mean, we have a primary coming up in a couple of weeks.
There's a conversation happening out there in the journalism world about elections coverage. And it's been going on for a long time. And a lot of it is the same. Hey, you're doing this wrong. We're all doing this wrong. All we're covering is the horse race, right? The problem is people love the horse race.
People love the horse race. And then and they also, the negative campaigning, the closer and closer you get to an election, I think there is a role of journalism to like debunk some of the negative campaigning.
I think so too. And here's what I say, okay, so people are attracted to the sexy stuff, the drama, the wars, the intrigue, the winning, the losing, the mean ads, that stuff. Okay, fine. Grab them with that little bit of thing, but then you have to wrap all this context around it. So they actually walk away from this story knowing more than who's up, who's down, who's mean, whatever. And so it's like, all right, you come in for the Velveeta, for the queso, that's fine, but there's broccoli under it, right? So you're not going to get that cheese sauce without our little piece of broccoli that's coming in there. And that's what we have to do is our job is to cook broccoli all day long. But if you don't connect with what motivates people to find out, to seek out news, then you're wasting your time. So, okay, we have new poll results and we're going to tell you what this means for abortion in New Mexico. You know, haha, we got you with an actual issue, something relevant, right? So we need to think hard about how we can, I'm not saying bait and switch, but I'm saying how we can add valuable context to something that is very deeply criticized as not helping, you know?
Yes, as we talk about the elections, I was thinking about, over the years, when I was a young reporter, the horse race stuff really, really, really captivated me because it was new to me, right? It was new to me and it was really interesting. Over the years, not as much. And part of it is that sometimes, journalists have come in, older journalists when I was young would come in and say, this politician is saying this, but in, 1988, they voted this way, and you have to be, it's a fact checking. It's a vetting of information that we've been talking about over the last 30 minutes. But that is I really like the part about the Velveeta and the broccoli. I kind of like the broccoli a lot now. I like taste of Velveeta, but I like the broccoli. I like the broccoli more. I'm a little
We
older.
have to balance it, Trip. I mean,
I know
they go well together, actually.
They but I think that's true of the stories.
Yeah.
Velveeta and broccoli, totally good.
Real trick, Trip, is getting the chili in the Velveeta.
Well, no, I agree. You're really really talking about the challenge of journalism, which is how do you pull people in. How do you entice them to read, to lure people when there's so much information out there that they have very little time to check out stuff?
I want to make a plug for a book, The Elements of Journalism. And a lot of the way that I talk about journalism is captured in this book by Bill Kovach and Tim Rosenstiel, who went around the country for several years, gathering groups of journalists to talk about what they do and how they do it and why they do it, and talking to audiences and readers and consumers, and trying to put together a book that explains what it is and what it is we do and how we do it. And so it's not a textbook, it's a trade paperback. It's really easy to read, and it explains a lot about what we do. And there's, I think they mention broccoli in here, although a lot of people talk about, Syria or Ukraine is the broccoli on the news plate. Like, God, we've got to look at it. We've got to read this stuff. But in the end, what does it mean? What now? Okay, so what does this mean for the strength of NATO? What does this mean in terms of the candidates that I'm thinking about electing to Congress? Do they support NATO? Yes. Do they have another idea? How do they think we should deal with this? Or do they think this isn't our problem at all? Right.
Right.
I think that, so the topic of this conversation is the role of journalism in a democracy. I think when it comes to elections, a good kind of a thing to do is like an imaginary kind of game, is to think about what would the state of the 2022 election be if there was no journalism happening. No journalism at all. So what we're left with is mailers going in, mailbox, paid advertising, and social media.
Some element of the biggest pocketbook, the deepest pocketbook wins, right? Mm-hmm. Journalism, especially local journalism, is an equalizing factor. Especially free organizations like New Mexico In Depth provide access to high quality information that may help them sort out the signal from the noise that they're otherwise in their
and I would definitely give a shout out though to our colleagues at the newspapers and the television stations that are slogging around every day, really covering on the daily the ins and outs of the negative advertising, trying to put some context around it, the questionnaires that they send out and publish of every candidate. Not every candidate returns those, I know, but
but who does a great job too is the League of Women Voters,
Yes.
vote
Yes.
411, right?
Right.
It's super, super valuable.
I want to, this is something that we have talked about before too, which is, you mentioned the mailers, the social media, I'd say the TV commercials, not the news broadcast, the commercials. That's, I'm going to make the distinction between media and journalism, because journalism is actually looking at that mailer and going, wait a second, let's read it, let's vet it. Where does, who's the campaign? Who's on the campaign? Where's this, let's go look at the Secretary of State's office and look at this stuff. That's something that I think sometimes is in this age of so much information. When the term media is thrown around, I think people think that that's journalism. In some ways, no, that's not. I mean, journalism is actually, we're vetting that information. We're trying to make sense of that. We've talked about sense making, right? We've talked about it here on this broadcast, but that's you guys are exactly right. The local media, the local journalists, are so important.
About making sense of things. And what I was going to say a minute ago that I forgot, thank you for reminding me, is we have a duty to make the significant relevant to people. So, I mean, this has been my beat for a really long time. Redistricting, before it comes around, and even while it's happening, the vast majority of people are like, I give zero craps about that. And then they're like, what do you mean my representative changed? What do you mean I'm in a new district? And it's like, this was important the whole time. And that's why I've been on the TV and writing about this for New Mexico in Depth for so long. It is our duty to get out there and say, hey, you guys, you really should pay attention to this, because here's how it's going to impact your life, right?
In some ways, as you're saying that, because I'm like you, it's like redistricting. Oh, wow, this is like really cool stuff. I love this stuff. But I mean, in some ways, it's, we're nerds about this over here in New Mexico in Depth. And I think a lot of people will see this stuff as like watching paint dry, when in fact, it is like really important to democracy.
We have to remember that what interests us about these things is not, there's a Venn diagram there, right? And so maybe the overlap isn't that great between what we think is interesting with all the context we have of redistricting cycles back to 1980, and just a person who lives downtown and wants to know, am I going to get lumped in with the North Valley, or am I going to get lumped in with the South Valley, or am I going to be in a district with other people in my neighborhood who share my concerns about traffic and crime and homelessness?
That's
right?
the Velveeta cheese.
Yeah.
And the broccoli. No, it's hard. It is hard to
We
balance.
don't always do a good job of it. And it is a constant challenge to try to figure out, what do people need to know? And how can I grab their attention and really quickly share with them what is happening and why it's important to you? Why, how, so what?
And I really want to give a plug. I mean, I think we're going to wrap up here soon. So I really want to that's a really good note for me to give a plug for everyone to support local journalism, and not just New Mexico in Depth, although that's great, but also all your local papers, because if you've noticed, the local media outlets or journalism outlets have shrunk. They have shrunk over the last decade and a half. A lot of it has to do with this so-called free information that's out there on the internet. So you have fewer beat reporters, you have fewer reporters working in your community. And it does us all a disservice, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think people should ask themselves, how much do you care about this? And how much are you paying for it right now? Add up the streaming services that you pay for. How much is that? And how much are you paying for local news, whether it's a subscription to the paper or support for New Mexico in Depth? Do you really want to be embarrassed to say you pay more for Disney Plus than you do for your paper or for New Mexico in Depth? Right. Let's recalibrate our values and our priorities here. And if you believe in this, you should support it. Support your public television station, your public radio station, your local newspapers, your nonprofit outlets. They need money or it can't happen. And you know what? The vast majority of Americans don't pay a dime for it.
I mean, it's like redistricting in some ways for some people, which is they don't know they miss it until something happens in their neighborhood or their city. I mean, Next time there's a huge wildfire, that's, you know, the Taos News has fewer reporters, that could really affect information coming out of local communities. So Marjorie's right. I guess on that note, we probably should wrap up, because we, as nerds, journalism nerds, could talk about this for 4 hours.
Yeah, we probably could talk longer.
And we have a sexy story about redistricting coming out soon that we've got to edit.
We do.
That's right.
Usually all your
everybody,
reporting on redistricting.
yeah, that's right. For everyone who has watched this or will watch this, thank you so much for joining us on this conversation. It's a very important conversation about the importance of journalism and democracy. This has been fun. I love doing this, so maybe we should think about doing more of these. Anyway, that's just me.
I really appreciate you guys having me. It's fun for me to talk about my work and put it in the context that I use to explain it to students now. It's fun for me to think about journalism, not just as something that I do, but as I think about where it fits in the wider world. And I'm really grateful for New Mexico in Depth. And I am a believer.
Gwyneth, thank you so much. Joanna, thank you for helping out today and getting stuff.
Yes,
up and
thank you,
running.
Joanna.
Marjorie, for Marjorie and me, I guess we're saying goodbye. You guys have a great rest of your week. And we'll let you know when we're doing this again.
Awesome. Bye, guys.
Bye.